So, what is game literacy and why is it important? We often talk about media literacy, the ability to read an article, understand its sources and point of view, all of these things about existing in the media ecosystem that help make us more informed consumers of that information. Well, games are similar. There are tons of ways that games communicate as games, and if you've been in the industry a while, you've maybe forgotten a little bit of what it's like to not understand what it means when a cliff is painted yellow. So, our next speaker is here to talk about game literacy, give some of their own experiences into acquiring their own literacy, and helping us better understand why it matters and how to prepare our games and communities for people from a variety of backgrounds. A game designer at Pipeworks Studio, please welcome back to the GDoc stage, Monica Fan.
Hello, I am Monica Fan, and I am a game designer from Pipeworks. And today I'm excited to share this talk about why game literacy matter. Who I am and why do I care about game literacy. I am a gameplay and system designer who has been in the industry around 5 years. I started to get interested in game literacy mostly because I grew up in an environment. Grew up in China in a very restricted like environment, so I didn't really have a lot of exposure to video games or entertainment media in general, despite very interested in working in the entertainment media. So when I came to America when I was 18, I had to overcome several layers of literacy, including language, media, and when I studied game design, I had to fast track myself to like different game literacy, both because of my lack of gaming experience growing up and also because the gaming culture where I come from is very different than the gaming culture here. Another thing that kind of makes me interested in talking about literacy is because when I was in college, I teach digital literacy for teenagers. And one thing I have noticing is how much digital literacy can empower youth, especially youth who don't have a lot of resource, and being able to like having literacy can help them enjoy the media a lot more. Why literacy can be so powerful? Well, firstly, by understanding literacy, you can communicate more effectively and make sense of the world. In this case, by understanding the literacy of one game, it helps you onboard other game and enjoy other game much faster. And understand gameplay intent and help you enjoy the game, and less you will be less frustrated and lost, but also contextualize why certain design system. To me, I like to think every game I play is a dialogue between me and a game developer. So by understanding the language of game, I can understand why the certain design is made. And once I do, I can have a better judgment about whether the design is effective or not. Lastly, from a broader level, we are living in a world where gamification and dark pattern design is everywhere, not just in game. And we are seeing a lot of people are fall into the like dark pattern design that makes people spending extra money and spending more money than they probably like can afford. And being able to understand game literacy hope ideally make people more aware about the dark pattern and gamification design that in our real world and how people protect themselves from some of the exploitatory design that happens in the like commercial world. Examples of myths. I will go into the detail, but here are some of the example when I talk about like I have seen that myths that I have often seen in the game design room. So the first common myth is younger player equals better literacy. I think this is a really common myth that I used to have because when I was a millennial, I look at people older than me. Like when I was a kid, as a millennial, when I was a kid, I look at people older than me and think, oh, they like, how come they don't know how to use like, basic HTML and CSS to custom wipe and why they're struggling with the basic like office suite. And it is easy to, at the time, to think, oh, if we have next generation, they're gonna be much more sophisticated than I am. Just like I know certain things my parents don't. However, working in the tech industry, designing user experience for different audience, I quickly learned this is not an effective way to think about it, and rather it's more effective to think that different generation has very different understanding of digital literacy. I know people older than me who are really good at understand binary and computer memory and how to design accordingly. That I haven't really have a lot of experience that as not a computer engineer. However, most people of my generation are very comfortable with using like Photoshop, using HTML, CSS because we grew up in the MySpace generation where the only way to custom your online world is through like web coding. And but I am like, and a lot of people in my generation, we're not as good as navigating 3D world with like touchscreen joystick, which I have noticing is like when I'm teaching high schooler, is Gen Zs are much better at play FPS game on like mobile phone and with like virtual joystick. That for me, I'm still like struggling to like have like a good control with that. And then even with the even younger generation, they have like we are seeing a new generation of VR native where virtual reality is their most comfortable gaming experience. And but we are also seeing there are certain things younger people don't know that we know, like how to use like web development tools and stuff. And so instead of seeing like generation as like literacy as something gets better or worse each generation, it's much more effective if we contextualize that at each generation and different lived experience result in different type of game literacy. Example of the common myths. The second one is higher literacy requirement equals hard game and adversarial design. I think this is a really common myth I have seen is people who design Souls-like game or like games that is labeled as difficult. Often it's easy to think, oh, they don't need to worry about game literacy because the audience who like their game, of course, they are gamers with a lot of experience. That's why they see difficulty. However, if you look at a real life like game example, that's not the case because on the left we have games like Stanley Parable and Jazz Punk and Beginner's Guide, where I would consider games that does not have really hard control, but had require a very high level of game literacy in order to enjoy it. I have personal had this experience of playing Stanley Parable before I started playing a lot of video game and not understanding why it's such a good game, but play it later, like after I become a game designer for a couple of years and then playing Stanley Parable, I'm able to much better understanding why this game is such a cult classic and why so many people love it and enjoy it. And uh, while on the right, we have the opposite example. So think about game like DDR and Pump It Up. When I was little, I remember DDR was really big, and people like my parents, people who definitely do not identify as gamer, are all playing DDR as a way of exercise. And DDR is one of those games you don't really need a lot of higher literacy to play the game because the control and the visual language and general input is pretty straightforward. However, it's extremely hard and very hard to get good. If anyone who has played DDR can probably relate, this is like one of those games that it takes a lot of practice and mobility skill to get good at DDR, but it doesn't really necessarily to like require you to have a lot of knowledge from other game. Uh, Another like common example I have seen in like strategy and system heavy game is player not understanding what they need to do equals, oh, we need to dumb down the system and strategy. That is not always the case. One example I have is when I play RTS game. For a long time, I didn't play RTS game when I first started playing video game. And when I played the first time, I played an Age of Mythology. I was doing the thing of I was moving each unit individually because that's what I do when I play game like Sims or World of Warcraft. However, I quickly learned that's very ineffective and I keep losing. So I looked it up on the internet and learned that RTS game is one of those games you really need to move like group of enemy together and you need to understand different shortcut, which is something I did not understand. So to me, for like if you're an RTS designer who want to cater to people like me, instead of making the game easier, it may be considered like is teaching player how to move the group in different shortcut, but also maybe creating non-shortcut way to move different group. Another example we have on the right is when we were working on Old World. Old World is a game that Soren Johnson spent a lot of time to make sure the onboarding is very fun. So it was designed with the idea that you play the game a couple times, you play a couple rounds, then you will understand the system because it's really hard and it can be very overwhelming if we just teach player all the system ahead of time. However, we will encounter like player who are uncomfortable with playing the game without understanding all the system before. As a result, we had to like retroactively write a wiki. So for the player who don't feel comfortable touching the game until they understand all the system, we have additional resource for them. And lastly is game literacy is definitely not universal across cultures. I have an example of all the games like me and like my friend played, which is a lot of flash game and hyperculture game. And the game, like I have heard a lot of like my peers in America play when they were kids, which is a lot of like FPS game and hardcore like horror game. So these are both video game and people player of both can identify as gamer, but uh, when people who play one type of game growing up or who play a lot of one type of game can like would have trouble to get good and get comfortable with the other type of game. Uh, Literacy challenge that is not myth, but people don't talk enough about is the challenge of having to use twin stick to navigate basic 3D environments. I learned this when I was designing like virtual space for gallery audience, and I would put like a controller thinking that that's the most easiest, straightforward way for people to like just walk around. And I wasn't really making a game, so all they really need to do is just walk around and look around. Um, but I very fast realized there are people who have never really touched a game controller, and the fact that one stick you move, the other stick like you control camera can be very jarring and very uncomfortable if that's not a control scheme they're used to. And the same about like people who grew up play flat game and touch screen, where they will also have trouble with like twin stick. I also know people who grew up with like tank control, where they don't know how to play game without like, oh, they're uncomfortable with playing game that doesn't have like the inverse control. So Kate, like it's always nice to like test your game to audience with very different gaming culture and background to understand like what are their unique challenge. Other game literacy challenge, text. So one big skill you need to have when you play narrative driven game is understand what text are flavor text that you don't need to memorize all the detail, but help you understand the story. What texts are crucial gameplay information that one example I have is Persona 5 that they will have a lot of class and then couple weeks later they will quite like quiz you on the thing they say earlier. So if I didn't pay attention in the first time and I end up did really bad on the test, which taught me to take notes when the teacher are giving like history lessons. And also like what are the like dialogue choice that matters that will impact the ending. Telltale has this feature where when you say certain things, they will have a line that blah 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 will remember that. This is a very controversial design. It may not be the best way, but it is a way to help people who are not used to choice-based game to understand that their choice have consequence and what choice have consequence. Another thing about like culture related is rule following versus treasure finding behind a wall. A lot of game has the design where they will tell you to go right, but if you go left, you find extra coin. This is something if you are used to this type of game, it's very like natural. However, if you're not used to certain type of game, like I did when I first started, I was a very like strong rule follower, the gamer, and it become really like I lost a lot of resource as a result that could have made my game or the final boss easier. Uh, Tolerance of game grind failure and monetization solution. This is a very cultural thing. Is different cultural and region player have a different standard what they consider a game is too long, too short, too grindy, too punishing. And also different culture have different tolerance about the fact that paying more money to get to make the game easier. So when you make a game that you're catering to audience from different region and culture, it's important to do research and understand where the line is for each region and the culture of the player you're trying to target. And visual signifier meaning, like visual signifier and sound signifier is very, very important in game design. As a system designer, that's like one of my main tool. However, there's a lot of debate about things like yellow paint, things like color, whether they are too hand holding or whether like if they're necessary. In my experience, we often encounter players who think they don't need those assists, but when we remove it, they get very lost and confused. So this is kind of like later to like the tips I'll have, but visual and sound signifier is very different, and also what color means rare, what color means common are different across culture. So understand the culture and visual language of your player can help a lot. Uh, Things that can be helpful. Here are some stuff I learned through years of doing game design that can help uh, the conversation that like I can have during the game design meeting that can help bridge the conversation about game literacy and solve some like prevent some of the headache later on. One thing like keep in mind is player often over and underestimate their game literacy. People have usually have a understanding about how good or how bad they are at their game based on their own personal experience and their experience compared to their peer. However, it is very common for people either like people who are identified as gamer tend to overestimate their game literacy skill versus people who don't identify as gamer have a tendency to underestimate their game literacy skill. As a game designer, it's important to understand what it's like to have that like to be the pro of your genre and what it's like to be an average and casual player of your genre. And I always strive to be the highest literacy of the genre. Doesn't mean I'm good at playing game, but which is the last point. But like to me, it's important to understand all the potential language and tools player of this genre to like could be using, but also understand that I need to like cater to player who don't have very high literacy of the genre, and they should still be able to have fun, if that's one of the goal you have for your game. Follow game develop the game dev are not your target audience. I've seen this a lot with indie dev is they like to play test with other game dev, and in general professional game developer has higher literacy than average player. So if you fall into the pitfall, you only play test with your fellow game dev, you may miss some of the game literacy challenge of your game. Thank you so much, and you can find me on LinkedIn, email, Blue Sky, and I'm hope this talk can inspire you to think more about game literacy during your game design, and I'm looking forward to talk more about game design, game literacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk, Monica. It honestly wasn't until a few weeks ago when I saw my dad holding a PS4 controller like it was this awkward handheld thing with sticks and buttons that I remembered that a controller is an awkward handheld thing with sticks and buttons. And I have just happened to have the opportunity to learn how to use one over the course of the past few decades. There was a time where I would walk around in Halo 2 staring at the sky and inevitably getting tagged by my friends. So if we're going to make games a more accessible experience for everyone, considering their literacy is going to be really important. Thank you so much again for that talk, Monica. If you would like to catch up with them, you can find them on Blue Sky at designermonicat, or you can shoot them an email at monicafxj@gmail.com.